If you are watching this video, then odds are you will never play the game Triad Wars. This video was uploaded on January 20th, 2016 to coincide with the shutting down of Triad Wars' servers. The official statement is that it is simply the closing of a beta, but from what I can see, the future doesn't look bright. But what was Triad Wars, you ask? Well, that's what I'm going to go over today. This isn't a video telling you about how Triad Wars was a masterpiece that was killed in its prime. This is simply me explaining and reviewing it to an audience that will likely never experience it. Now to answer that question, Triad Wars was a free-to-play game that seemed to be produced a bit cheaply. By that I mean tons of its assets were straight ported from Sleeping Dogs, a game you can certainly still play. For instance, Sleeping Dogs' combat was essentially copy-pasted over, as well as its animations and world map. If you didn't know, Sleeping Dogs was a game released in 2012 that takes place in Hong Kong, with you controlling the character of Wei Shen, a Chinese-American undercover cop torn between his roots in the Triad and his loyalty to the police. Triad Wars was the, and I can't possibly finger quote this anymore, multiplayer spin-off to this title where you play as a Triad enforcer of your own design a few years before Sleeping Dogs. You've got an uncle that talks to you sometimes and appears in a short tutorial, but otherwise there isn't any story. But gameplay-wise, Triad Wars did have some things going for it. That combat copy-pasted from Sleeping Dogs was a good combat system, feeling like Yakuza's combat by way of the Batman Arkham series, with some guns thrown in for good measure. Although, I will say the gunplay is nowhere near as good as the hand-to-hand stuff, and trust me, Triad Wars used guns way more than Sleeping Dogs ever did. The guns are a bit stiff and run out of ammo quickly, but nonetheless they are by far the quickest way of dispatching opponents. And where were these opponents fought? Well, here comes the multiplayer part of this game. In Triad Wars you got to run a turf with rackets and a safe house. Rackets included such things as cockfighting, counterfeiting, a black market called the night market, a sweatshop, and a few more illegal businesses. Over real time, these rackets would obtain either money or a type of good that can be used in an export mission. Exports were short, easy missions that tasked you with guarding a black van as it drove to the port to sell off your goods. If you didn't collect an export often, any uncollected money or goods could be stolen from you if you were to be raided successfully. And there, my friends, finally lies what Triad Wars called multiplayer. You could go around to other people's turfs and raid them full-on Clash of Clans style. There were 3 objectives to every raid: finish one racket, finish all the rackets, and defeat the enforcer. The enforcer was actually the person you were raiding, or rather an AI representing them. The materials you could get were obtained by finishing specific rackets, but the more objectives completed, the more face you could obtain. We'll talk about that soon, but what you need to know here is that raids were actually kind of fun. There was a certain rush to them. They were essentially 8 to 15 minutes of straight intense gameplay. The biggest problem with them was that later on you'd find that the enemies in raids became so numerous and so tanky that it would become literally impossible to finish all 3 objectives before time ran out and the cops showed up. But alas, this is where gold comes in, you know, the premium currency. With gold you could purchase card packs like Hearthstone that pertained to raids or a few other things. 2 of the most important cards you could get were infinite ammo and cards that increased the time you had to complete the raid. Suddenly what seemed impossible became very possible. As this was a free-to-play game and all, microtransactions were to be expected. But Triad Wars was actually pretty fair about it all. Finishing a raid objective got you a card that you could obtain in a card pack but for free, so with each raid you could gain up to 3 cards. On top of that, there were many tiny little missions out in the world map that would also give you cards, with some of those missions giving only raid cards. So by doing these missions, it actually kind of felt like gearing up for a good raid. What about getting the premium currency? Could you get any in-game? Yeah, actually. Not only were there cards that would just straight give you gold, but your safe house could launder money into 25 gold every day. There were also daily challenges that also gave you gold. All in all, you might not have been able to get the fanciest car for a while with this gold income, but you could afford raid and production packs, which were the cheapest and most important card packs by far. Now, I don't want to say it, but to be honest with you, I never really felt the need to buy any gold with my real money, and I'm just going to presume a lot of people were like that, which probably led to Square Enix pulling the plug on this game, even if I can't imagine it being that expensive to keep running. I mean, there were never enough people to break the servers, nor like any marketing for this game. Props to the developer though, who gave everyone 20,000 gold and some refunds after the game was announced to be cancelled. But enough about money and more about the game. The driving goal of this game was to reach the rank of Dragonhead. Now, this wasn't a level, there was a pretty standard leveling system outside of this. To rank up, you needed to acquire Face. Face was gained by completing objectives in raids and also completing random missions on the world map. You could also gain Face by praying at the crime scenes of fallen friends in the world and fallen enemies in your turf. Since it could be obtained in raids, it could be taken away in raids, and you would have to play pretty consistently to keep it up. The higher your rank, the more profitable and upgradable your turf was, so there was a practical purpose to it all outside of bragging rights. I only made it to the rank of Red Pole, but if you played the game a lot, it wouldn't be impossible to make it to Dragonhead. I only wish you gained more from ranking up other than just base upgrades, like perhaps new missions could have opened up to a high-ranking player, new appearance options, or really, just something to show your rank while out in the world. I talked about how this game was mostly copy-pasted from Sleeping Dogs earlier, but I'd like to stress that Triad Wars' experience wasn't identical to Sleeping Dogs. Raiding did not exist in Sleeping Dogs, nor anything like it. While the core mechanics were the same, the objectives definitely weren't, and I can't help but feel it made some people unhappy. Sleeping Dogs already has a sort of cult classic feel to it, and it's got some very devoted fans. I doubt I'm shocking anyone when I think most people just wanted a Sleeping Dogs 2. But I don't think that was really an option. Why? Well, look back 2 years and you'll see a statement from Square Enix declaring that Sleeping Dogs, along with Tomb Raider and Hitman Absolution, were all financial failures. Now look at the follow-ups to those games. Tomb Raider, a multi-platform title, had a sequel that was temporarily exclusive to the Xbox, signaling that perhaps it was Microsoft's money that made the game happen. Then we have the new Hitman game, delayed and to be released in parts after IO Interactive, its developer, experienced layoffs. Then we hit Sleeping Dogs, a game that didn't even have the luxury of belonging to two very successful franchises. If it took an exclusivity deal and an odd form of release for those games to get sequels, what hope did Sleeping Dogs have? Suddenly the mass reuse of content in a free-to-play game makes sense. Despite people's wishes, this was probably the best the higher-ups at Square Enix were willing to offer. That and the typical HD port for newer consoles that they didn't call an HD port anymore because people aren't falling for that crap when it barely looks better at all. So what lies in the future? Well, as far as I can see, Triad Wars is dead. Incredibly dead, even. Shortly before its cancellation, there was evidence of layoffs, with signals that this is bombed so hard that staff positions aren't even safeguarded. The developer, United Front Games, will probably stay around, though. They aren't owned by Square Enix, and they have work in porting and some ties with Sony. The best case scenario I can see here is if Triad Wars is put into behind-the-scenes development and given a proper multiplayer treatment. Either that or United Front Games takes what they learned with Triad Wars into the development of a possible Sleeping Dogs 2. Worst case scenario is that there's some contracts that I don't know about, and Triad Wars flopping could break those and cause serious trouble for United Front Games. Oh, and Sleeping Dogs as a franchise is dead, not just Triad Wars. But I'd like to be proven wrong. I want to see people coming to this video years from now telling me about how great the full release of Triad Wars is. I want to hear about how I was just wrong and pessimistic, and what's happening here is just a beta closure. But from my point of view, Triad Wars is dead. It died, it is dead, and it will be dead. What you think of that is your own opinion. In mine, it's kinda sad. Triad Wars was leagues from perfect. It had little content, was essentially a bundle of reused assets, and wasn't a true successor to Sleeping Dogs. But it had a lot of potential. The developer was proven, the combat was good, the content, what little there was good. Given time, it may have even become a good multiplayer game like so many wanted. But here we are, speculating, for Triad Wars didn't get to be anything better than it was. It didn't get a full release, it barely got updated, and now we can only remember what it was.